close your eyes and take a deep breath. Imagine Dublin under a soft morning mist, its cobblestone streets glistening with rain, quiet pubs glowing in the distance. To most, the city seems peaceful, ordinary, but beneath the surface, a web of power stretches across continents, invisible yet unbreakable. At the center of it is Christy Kinahan, a man known as the Quiet Mastermind. He doesn't seek headlines, doesn't crave spectacle. Instead, he rules through patience, strategy, and subtle influence. Every glance, every whispered conversation, every carefully orchestrated shipment is part of a network that spans Dublin, London, and Valencia. Tonight, you will step softly into his world, a world where silence holds more power than violence, where patience outweighs chaos, and where a single mind can control outcomes across nations. Let the mist of Dublin settle around you, and follow the Quiet Mastermind as he moves unseen, untouchable, and entirely in control. The rain fell in soft sheets over Dublin, turning cobblestones into slick mirrors that reflected the muted glow of the street lamps. The city smelled of wet stone and wood smoke, mingling with the faint scent of brewed beer wafting from the pubs. People moved quickly, hunched against the drizzle, umbrellas bobbing like miniature black canopies above their heads. Yet, amid this subdued chaos, there was a rhythm that only a few could truly sense. A rhythm of deals made quietly, of power exchanged in whispers. Christy Kinahan walked slowly, his long coat pulled tightly around him, collar turned up against the cold. His eyes, sharp and calculating, scanned the streets, not the faces of passers-by, not the neon signs, but the flow of the city itself. He noticed the subtle nods between men in dark jackets outside the corner pub, the discreet unloading of crates from a nearby van, the glance of a port worker signaling a delayed shipment. In these small movements he read entire stories. He had no need to announce his presence. To those who understood the language of the streets, his reputation preceded him. Christy was not a man who thrived on chaos or violence for its own sake. He preferred the quiet, measured control that came from patience, strategy, and the trust of those who worked for him. Each decision he made was calculated, every conversation a chess move in a game most people didn't realize they were playing. The Kinahan cartel was unusual in that it spread influence like a spider weaving a web. From Dublin's alleyways to London's docks, from sunlit ports in Spain to the shadowed warehouses of Eastern Europe, Christie's reach extended far beyond what newspapers or law enforcement could map. Yet unlike the stereotypical crime bosses that fascinated tabloids, he avoided flash. He avoided spectacle. His meetings were brief, his words deliberate, and his network of loyalty built through respect rather than fear alone. On this particular evening, Christy passed by a small pub tucked between a corner newsstand and a florist. The amber light spilled across the wet pavement, illuminating a group of men leaning casually against the brick wall. They straightened subtly at the sight of him, a single nod of acknowledgement passing between them. These men were longtime associates, trusted, capable, and discreet. Their roles in the network were as essential as the threads in a finely woven tapestry. And tonight, a new challenge awaited, one that required every ounce of Christie's strategic mind. Inside the pub, the warmth contrasted sharply with the chill outside. Christy ordered a single black coffee, the steam rising slowly as he took a seat in a corner booth. From here, he could see everyone who entered without being seen himself. The pub was quiet, the kind of place where businessmen met quietly, away from prying eyes. A soft conversation floated across the room, punctuated by the clink of glasses and the occasional burst of laughter. But Christy wasn't here to enjoy the ambience. He was here to listen. A young man approached, neatly dressed, carrying a small envelope. The man's hands trembled slightly, not from fear, Christy observed, but from anticipation. He placed the envelope on the table and stepped back. Christy opened it slowly, sliding out a single sheet of paper. Details of a shipment, location, timing, contacts, were written in precise, almost clinical handwriting. Nothing was out of place. Nothing was risky. But there was one anomaly, a potential delay that could compromise the operation. Christie's eyes narrowed slightly. A problem to solve. And in Dublin, problems like these rarely waited. Outside, the rain continued, blurring the lights of the city into soft streaks of gold and silver. Christy finished his coffee, set the cup down carefully, and rose. His movement was deliberate, unhurried, yet every step commanded attention. He stepped back into the misty streets, the night swallowing him as though he were part of the shadows themselves. To the casual observer, he was just another man walking home. To those who understood, he was a strategist, a tactician, a quiet mastermind whose influence spanned continents. In Dublin, Power was often loud and chaotic, displayed through violence and fear. But Christy Kinahan's power was different. It was subtle like the currents under a calm river, invisible yet unstoppable. And tonight, as he vanished into the rainy streets, the city itself seemed to acknowledge it. The whispers of deals, alliances, and secrets flowed through the streets, all under the watchful eye of the man who preferred negotiation over noise, patience over chaos, and influence over notoriety. Christy walked slowly along the rain-slicked streets, the sound of his footsteps muted by the patter of raindrops. Each corner he passed held stories, some whispered in pubs, others spoken quietly in offices and warehouses. Dublin had a rhythm, a pulse that few could read. Christy had learned it over decades, not through textbooks or police reports, but through observation, intuition, and experience. Every alleyway, every dock, every shadow held meaning. He paused outside a small warehouse near the docks. A faint light glimmered through a cracked window. Inside, men moved crates efficiently, their motions quiet but deliberate. Kinahan's associates had been preparing for weeks, ensuring the shipment would pass without incident. Every detail mattered: timing, coordination, the placement of vehicles, even the direction the rainwater flowed. Christie's mind calculated probabilities, risks, and contingencies with a calm precision that made the city's chaos almost irrelevant. A familiar figure emerged from the shadows. A man named Liam, one of Christie's longtime lieutenants. Liam nodded once, subtle, almost imperceptible. He knew the drill. He had worked with Christie for years and understood that the smallest errors could cascade into disasters. Together, they reviewed the details of the shipment, checking the list of contacts, the timing of vehicles, and the potential for interference from rivals or law enforcement. Every decision was deliberate, every move calculated. Christie's advantage was patience. While others acted on impulse, he observed. While others sought immediate results, he waited for the perfect moment. Tonight, he was testing a new tactic, a reroute designed to avoid a surveillance sweep that had been reported by a trusted informant in London. Most would panic at such a complication, but Christie simply considered it another puzzle. "You're sure about the timing?" he asked Liam quietly, his voice calm, almost conversational. "Yes, Christie," Liam replied. "All contingencies accounted for. The men know their positions. Nothing moves without your signal." Christie nodded, satisfied. Control, he thought, was often less about action than about foresight. To command an empire quietly, one must anticipate every ripple before it becomes a wave. Dublin streets, slick with rain, became a chessboard in his mind. Every pedestrian, every car, every shadow had a place in the larger strategy. As they walked back toward the city center, Christie noticed a familiar pub tucked into a side street, its door slightly ajar. Inside, a small gathering of businessmen and local officials quietly discussed matters that could influence shipping contracts, property deals, and even municipal policies. Kinahan observed them from across the street, noting connections and alliances. Even here, in this unassuming establishment, decisions were being made that would ripple across his empire. Returning to his apartment, Christie removed his coat and set his coffee on the table. The apartment was modest for a man of his influence, but he preferred it that way: spare, functional, unassuming. From here, he could monitor his empire through a network of trusted associates and discreet surveillance. The balance of power did not require opulence. It required intelligence, patience, and discretion. He reviewed the day's reports. Minor disputes among associates in London, delays in a shipment in Spain, whispers of law enforcement interest near one of his warehouses. Each item was assessed, categorized, and stored in his mind. For Christie, power was not measured in headlines or notoriety, it was measured in outcomes. And outcomes depended on foresight, communication, and the quiet alignment of resources. Even as night fell deeper over Dublin, the city remained oblivious to the movements of one man who quietly orchestrated events across continents. A rival might boast loudly, seeking attention and fear, but Christie's strength lay in remaining unseen, untouchable, and calculated. It was in these quiet hours, when most of the city slept or sought refuge from the rain, that he exercised his greatest influence. Outside, the rain continued, painting the streets with reflections of light and shadow. Inside, Christie's mind worked, plotting routes, timing shipments, and anticipating moves that others would not even consider. Loyalty, discretion, and strategy were his tools. And as he finally leaned back, the city hummed around him, unaware that its quietest corners were controlled by the most watchful eyes. Tonight there would be no drama. No gunfire. No shouting. Just strategy executed with precision. A shipment moved without notice, alliances strengthened quietly and power maintained in silence. Christy Kinahan, the quiet mastermind, had once again shaped the world around him without ever needing to make a scene. And as sleep approached for Dublin citizens, the city's hidden currents continued under his guidance. Every whispered message, every subtle nod, every unseen action played into the intricate dance of loyalty, influence and control that defined Christie's empire. In the stillness, one truth remained. In a world that thrived on noise, he had mastered silence, and that silence was far more powerful than any shout. Christie's apartment was modest, but every object had a purpose. A single lamp cast a warm glow over a desk stacked with carefully organized reports. Each envelope and folder represented a thread in the vast web he controlled: shipments, contacts, financial flows, intelligence from overseas associates. On the surface it looked ordinary. But to those who understood, it was the command center of an empire. A soft knock on the door signaled the arrival of another trusted lieutenant, Sean O'Reilly. Sean was younger, with keen eyes and a disciplined mind, tasked with monitoring the European operations. He entered quietly, offering Christy a brief nod. "Reports from Valencia," Sean said, placing a thin envelope on the desk. "Everything is proceeding, but there's chatter about increased port inspections. They're asking questions that don't match the usual routine." Christy examined the notes, his expression calm, betraying nothing. Increased inspections were a nuisance, not a threat. He traced his finger over the logistics chart, thinking about timing, alternative routes and potential delays. "Adapt the plan," he said softly. "Use the secondary shipment. Inform the crews in London and Dublin to hold position until confirmation. Keep it quiet. No alarms, no unnecessary movement." Sean nodded, understanding that Christie's strength lay in subtlety. Actions were rarely reactive. They were preemptive, precise, and invisible to anyone not in the inner circle. Meanwhile, in a quiet pub across the street, two associates discussed minor disputes over distribution routes. They spoke in low tones, unaware that Christy was watching from a distance, noting body language, gauging alliances, and identifying potential weaknesses. What might have seemed trivial to outsiders was vital intelligence to him. A subtle shift in loyalty or hesitation could ripple through the network, affecting operations far beyond Dublin. Christy preferred these quiet observations. Violence was a last resort. Intelligence and foresight were the tools he wielded daily. While others relied on intimidation, he relied on strategy. He had learned long ago that a whisper could command more power than a gunshot. Later that evening, Christy contacted a trusted associate in London via encrypted phone line. The conversation was brief, almost casual in tone. "Everything ready for the shipment?" he asked, his voice measured. "Yes," the voice on the other end replied. "The men are in position. No issues so far. Only minor delays with customs, nothing that can't be handled." "Good. Keep the chain tight. No surprises," Christy said, ending the call. He leaned back, allowing himself a moment of quiet reflection. Across decades he had built this empire not through chaos, but through meticulous planning, loyalty, and the strategic application of power. Dublin may have seemed ordinary to an outsider, but beneath its misty streets and quiet pubs lay a kingdom that spanned continents, silent, efficient, and almost invisible. As midnight approached, Christy reviewed the day's developments once more. Minor skirmishes between rival groups had been resolved quietly. Financial flows were secure. Trusted associates were loyal. Every thread in the web was intact. Yet even in this calm he knew challenges would arise. An unobserved rival, a change in law enforcement tactics, or a single misstep could threaten the delicate balance he maintained. But these were risks he relished, challenges to test strategy, patience, and discretion. And in this realm, Christy Kinahan thrived. The rain outside softened to a gentle drizzle. Streetlights flickered in the quiet night, casting long shadows over wet pavement. From his apartment, Christy watched the city breathe, unseen and unhurried. His empire was not built on spectacle. It was built on the silent, unwavering application of intelligence and influence. And as he finally allowed himself to sit back, a quiet smile touched his lips. In a world obsessed with chaos and noise, he had mastered the power of calm, patience, and subtlety. Dublin slept unaware that its streets, docks, and alleyways were guided by a man whose quiet decisions shaped the fates of people continents away. And in that silence, Christy Kinahan, the quiet mastermind, held absolute control, unseen, untouchable, and utterly precise. The soft tap of rain on the windowpane was the only sound as Christy sat back in his chair. He allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. In Dublin he was almost invisible, a man who blended into the misty streets, the quiet pubs, and the ebbing nightlife. But his empire stretched far beyond the city, across borders and oceans, touching London's docks, Valencia's sunlit ports, and even the shadowy corners of the Mediterranean. Across the city, one of his trusted international contacts, Miguel Alvarez, was coordinating operations in Spain. Miguel was meticulous, a man whose calm nature mirrored Christy's own. He sent regular updates through encrypted channels, reporting on shipments, port inspections, and potential delays. Christy absorbed the information like a general reading the map of a battlefield. Every small detail could become significant, every anomaly a signal to act. Meanwhile, back in London, Sarah Connolly, a logistics expert in Kinahan's eyes on the ground, was quietly resolving a scheduling conflict at one of the warehouses. Her efficiency was remarkable. She understood Christy's method of operation better than most. She never questioned, never rushed, and never sought the spotlight. Kinahan valued this calm reliability, knowing that it kept his network smooth and operational. Back in Dublin, Christy's attention shifted to a minor disturbance in the west side of the city. A rival group, small but ambitious, had attempted to interfere with one of his shipments. Christy did not rush into retaliation. Instead, he considered the best course of action, a measured, invisible response that would neutralize the threat without attracting unwanted attention. He called Liam, his lieutenant in Dublin, over the secure line. "Do not confront them directly," Christy instructed. "Observe, contain, and wait. If they act foolishly, let the city handle it. We only intervene when absolutely necessary. Keep our hands clean and our reputation intact." Liam nodded, understanding that Christy's strength lay in patience. Most outsiders would have charged into confrontation, letting their pride or aggression dictate action. But Christy thrived in anticipation, in reading the currents of human behavior, and acting with precision. As the night deepened, Christy allowed himself a quiet stroll through the streets. The rain had lightened to a soft drizzle, the kind that made everything shimmer. He passed the corner pub again, noting the subtle nods and exchanged glances of those who were part of his network. Even in such ordinary locations, power was present, quiet, effective, and nearly invisible. He walked past the docks, where crates were unloaded with quiet efficiency under Miguel's direction. Each crate, each shipment, was a piece of the larger puzzle. One misstep, one leak of information could have cascading consequences, but Christy had built redundancies, trusted men and women in every location who understood his method. Control through discretion, influence through loyalty. By the time he returned to his apartment, the first hints of dawn were brushing the sky with pale light. Christy prepared a small breakfast, taking care not to disturb the quiet. His routine was simple, almost mundane, yet it reflected his philosophy: precision, patience, and order in every action. Even breakfast was part of the rhythm that maintained control over an empire unseen. He reviewed the day's intelligence one final time. Minor disputes had been contained, shipments confirmed, and associates accounted for. The rival group in the West had not made any further moves, their ambition checked without any need for violence. Across Europe, operations flowed smoothly. Dublin remained unaware of the silent hand guiding these events. Christy leaned back, allowing himself a rare smile. In a world often obsessed with spectacle, he had mastered silence. In a world driven by chaos, he had created order. And in this quiet mastery, he held power that few could even comprehend. Tonight, as the city slowly awakened, it did so under the guidance of a man who preferred negotiation over noise, patience over chaos, and subtlety over spectacle. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets gleaming in the morning light, and Christy Kinahan's empire of shadows remained intact, invisible but omnipresent. And as he closed his eyes for a few hours of rest, the city hummed quietly around him, completely unaware of the threads of influence woven delicately by the Quiet Mastermind. Christy's apartment overlooked a quiet street, the kind where only the soft shuffle of early pedestrians could be heard. He moved deliberately, setting a cup of coffee on the desk beside a map dotted with colored pins, each one marking a shipment, a contact, or a strategic location. Dublin was only the beginning. His influence reached far beyond Ireland, touching London's docks and the sunlit ports of Spain, each thread interwoven into a web that most people could neither see nor understand. A soft knock interrupted the stillness. Sean O'Reilly entered, carrying a tablet loaded with the latest operational updates. "Minor disruption in Valencia," Sean said quietly. "Port inspectors are questioning documentation. It'll slow the shipment by a few hours if not managed carefully." Christy leaned over the tablet, his fingers tracing the route. "We anticipated this," he said calmly. "Redirect the cargo through the secondary port. Notify Miguel. Keep the teams synchronized. No one should notice anything unusual." Sean nodded, accustomed to the precision of Christy's instructions. "And the rival group in Dublin?" Christy paused for a moment, choosing words with care. "Let them make their move if they dare. We intervene only when absolutely necessary. Timing is everything. Patience is power." Outside, the city was waking slowly. A faint golden light reflected off the wet streets, and the soft sounds of trams and footsteps carried through the mist. Dublin appeared serene, but Christy knew better. The city was alive with subtle movements, alliances, rivalries, and opportunities, all of which he tracked meticulously. In London, Sarah Connolly was already at work, quietly ensuring that Kinahan's operations ran smoothly. She coordinated schedules, monitored shipments, and maintained communications between Dublin and Spain. Each decision she made rippled through the network, but she acted seamlessly, almost invisibly. Christy called her over a secure line. "Everything on track?" he asked. "Yes," Sarah replied. "The minor delay in Valencia is handled. Teams are aligned and no one outside our network notices any discrepancy." "Good," Christy said. "Remember, the goal is efficiency without visibility. Nothing should call attention to us." Even for a man whose empire stretched across continents, discretion was paramount. Christy had learned early that the loudest gangsters attracted attention, and attention was dangerous. His methods were different. He wielded influence like a shadow, silent yet unstoppable. Back in Dublin, a small dispute had arisen between two associates over a new distribution route. They spoke quietly in a dimly lit alley, unaware that Christy had noticed. He did not intervene immediately. Instead, he observed, assessing loyalty, temperament, and potential consequences. This was his way, subtle control through observation, not confrontation. Later, he discreetly summoned Liam. "Handle it quietly," Christy instructed. "Remind them of priorities without creating tension. Our power is measured in stability, not intimidation." Liam understood. Actions in Kinahan's world were rarely reactive. They were deliberate, precise, and invisible to anyone not part of the inner circle. As the morning progressed, Christy allowed himself a brief walk along the river Liffey. The mist clung to the water's surface, curling around the bridges and warehouses. The streets were wet but quiet, and the soft patter of rain made the city feel intimate and contained. He observed the movement of delivery vans, the shifts of port workers, and the nods exchanged by trusted associates. Everything mattered. Every glance, every word, every small action could be a signal, a risk, or an opportunity. He returned home to a modest breakfast, simple and precise. Even mundane routines were part of maintaining control, creating order amidst the chaos of a world that most could barely understand. His life was disciplined, structured, and purpose-driven, a reflection of the empire he commanded. Christy's thoughts turned to his rivals. Ambition often created mistakes, and mistakes provided opportunities. A rival gang in the west side of Dublin had tried to encroach on one of his minor shipments. Christy did not act with force. Instead, he calculated, observed, and allowed the situation to evolve naturally. By the time any action was required, the rival would have exposed their intentions through their own impatience. He sent a quiet message to Liam: "Monitor. Do not engage unless necessary. We move only when the moment is right." Liam acknowledged, knowing that Christy's patience was not indecision, it was strategy. By mid-morning, all updates were in. The shipment through Spain was rerouted successfully, the rival threat remained contained, and associates across Europe had executed their roles without error. Christy reviewed the data, checking for anomalies. Nothing significant appeared. Control, as always, had been maintained. He allowed himself a rare moment of quiet reflection. Across the streets of Dublin, unnoticed, his empire moved like a living organism, coordinated, disciplined, and precise. Power, he reminded himself, was measured not in noise but in outcomes. The day moved forward, Dublin streets now bustling with life. Christy Kinahan, the quiet mastermind, walked among the people unnoticed, yet completely aware of every motion, every whisper, and every hidden thread of influence. In a city full of noise, he was a master of silence. And as the first hints of evening approached, Christy prepared to rest, knowing that even in sleep, his influence remained active, silent, subtle, and utterly unbroken. As dusk fell over Dublin, Christy returned to the apartment. The city had a soft glow under the streetlights, and the occasional tram clattered over the rails in the distance. Even in the ordinary hum of life, he could sense disturbances, small threads that might indicate bigger ripples. A subtle alert pinged on his encrypted device. A routine patrol had noticed a vehicle near one of the warehouses. Nothing major, but enough to warrant attention. Christy did not panic. "Keep calm," he whispered to himself. "Observation first. Action later." He immediately contacted Liam. "Monitor the area. Do not approach unless absolutely necessary. If questioned, offer nothing. Timing is everything." Within minutes, Liam confirmed the patrol had moved on, their attention diverted elsewhere. A small threat neutralized, not through confrontation but through patience and foresight. Christy smiled faintly. This was his art. Across Europe, Miguel Alvarez reported minor logistical concerns. A shipment in Valencia had been delayed due to inspection discrepancies, but Miguel had rerouted it efficiently. Christy studied the reports carefully. "Excellent," he murmured. "The chain remains intact. Keep it that way." Sarah Connolly in London was coordinating the flow of funds and documentation. Her updates were precise, her attention to detail meticulous. Christy noted a slight anomaly, a small deviation in document handling, but it was within expected variance. "No need to adjust yet," he said. "We watch, we wait. Predictability is our ally." Even the smallest of human errors could have consequences. A minor hesitation from one of his Dublin associates could have led to suspicion or exposure. Christy reviewed their assignments, ensuring every individual was positioned correctly, every movement accounted for. His mind worked like a clock, each gear turning smoothly, silently. Later he convened a short, private meeting with Liam and Sean. In a corner of the apartment, over soft coffee, they discussed the day's operations. "Reports from Valencia?" Christy asked. "Handled," Miguel's message confirmed. "Dublin rival group?" Christy asked, his voice calm. "Contained. They haven't made further moves," Liam replied. Christy nodded. "Good. Remember, control is maintained in subtlety. Do not escalate unnecessarily. Influence is stronger when invisible." The meeting ended in silence, each man understanding the weight of unspoken rules. Decisions were calculated. Loyalty was reinforced not with threats but with confidence in Christy's judgment. As night deepened, Christy allowed himself a brief walk along the river. The Liffey shimmered under the moonlight, mist curling over its surface. The city appeared tranquil, yet Christy perceived the undercurrents. Rival interests, subtle alliances, opportunities, and risks. To most, Dublin was peaceful. To Christy it was alive, every movement a potential puzzle to solve. Even in these quiet moments he reflected on his life's work. Years of observing human behavior, anticipating reactions, and orchestrating events had culminated in a network that spanned continents. Dublin's streets, London's docks, and Valencia's ports all moved in harmony under his guidance. He did not need violence to command respect. Subtlety, patience, and foresight were more powerful than any display of force. Returning to the apartment, Christy reviewed his notes one last time. Minor anomalies had been addressed, shipments were secure, associates were loyal, and no outside observer suspected the depth of his control. Power, he thought, was measured in outcomes, not in noise, not in visibility. And in this calm mastery he held absolute authority. He finally prepared for rest, the city around him quietly continuing its rhythms. Dublin slept, unaware that its streets, docks, and alleyways were orchestrated by a single mind, strategic, patient, and unflinchingly precise. The quiet mastermind had yet again ensured that his empire remained invisible, uninterrupted, and utterly secure. The morning sun barely pierced the mist that clung to Dublin's streets. Christy Kinahan moved quietly through the city, a man whose presence was felt rather than seen. The rain had washed the pavements clean, leaving them glistening under the soft light, but the city's pulse remained subtle, almost imperceptible to those who did not know where to look. Christy's mind was already across Europe. Miguel Alvarez in Spain had confirmed the rerouted shipment was on schedule, but subtle alerts indicated that port officials were growing suspicious of unusual patterns. Across the channel, Sarah Connolly in London had flagged a minor discrepancy in paperwork. Nothing catastrophic, yet both incidents required his attention. To Christy, these small irregularities were threats that, if ignored, could unravel far more than a single shipment. He settled into his modest apartment and opened an encrypted line to Miguel. "Status report," Christy said calmly. "Everything is proceeding," Miguel replied, his Spanish-accented English measured. "Minor inspection delays, but the secondary port handled the cargo efficiently. No leaks, no suspicions." "Good," Christy said. Maintain communication, but remember, do not over-explain. Subtlety is our shield. Too many words draw attention. Across London, Sarah had prepared the documentation for the following week's shipments. Christy reviewed her notes carefully. The tiniest deviation could invite scrutiny, and even a minor mistake might ripple through the network. Everything is precise, he murmured. Efficiency without exposure, our mantra. As the day progressed, Christy convened a small meeting with Liam and Sean. They gathered in a discreet corner of the apartment, papers and encrypted devices laid out with methodical precision. The agenda was simple yet vital. Monitor rivals, secure shipments, and ensure loyalty within the organization. There's been movement from a smaller Dublin faction, Liam reported quietly. They've tried probing one of the warehouses. No action yet, but they're testing boundaries. Christy considered the news carefully. Observe. Do not engage directly. Let them expose themselves. We intervene only when necessary and always discreetly. Timing is everything. Sean nodded. Understood. We maintain our positions, let the current run its course. This philosophy defined Christie's rule: control through observation, influence through loyalty, and strategy through patience. Unlike rivals who boasted, he acted invisibly, allowing others to reveal themselves through mistakes. Meanwhile, across the continent, Miguel was encountering resistance at the Valencia docks. A rival syndicate had attempted subtle interference, a delayed customs inspection, whispered rumors meant to unsettle crews. Christy did not panic. Instead, he calculated contingencies. Redirect through the southern channel, he instructed via encrypted line. Notify the crews but keep communications minimal. Nothing should appear unusual. This is a test of patience and coordination. Every decision reinforced the web of trust, loyalty, and strategy that Christy had built over decades. Even minor deviations were opportunities to gauge the reliability of his network, to reinforce discipline and trust without drawing attention. As evening fell over Dublin, Christy walked along the quiet river, reflecting on the subtle currents of influence he controlled. The city was alive, but it did not know it. Every nod, every glance, every whispered conversation was a potential piece of intelligence. His empire moved like a living organism, synchronized across borders, and every movement was calculated to maintain control without spectacle. In the shadows, he considered the next moves. Rival groups, law enforcement, and logistical challenges would test his patience. But Christy welcomed these challenges. They were opportunities to reinforce his authority, validate loyalty, and refine his strategies. Tonight, as the city rested, he was already planning the next steps, coordinating European shipments, reinforcing alliances, and preparing contingencies for every eventuality. Dublin slept, unaware that its streets, docks, and alleyways were quietly orchestrated by a man who wielded power not through noise or fear, but through calm, unyielding strategy. Christy Kinahan, the quiet mastermind, remained invisible, untouchable, and perfectly in control. By mid-afternoon, Dublin hummed with ordinary life. Streetcars clattered along rails, delivery vans weaved carefully through traffic, and pedestrians moved with quiet purpose. But Christy Kinahan's attention was elsewhere. From his modest office apartment, he could track every movement that mattered: the flow of shipments, the subtle gestures of associates, the whispers from rival factions. A soft chime from an encrypted device caught his eye. Miguel Alvarez in Valencia reported a potential complication. One of the dock inspectors is asking questions beyond protocol, Miguel wrote. Crew is calm, but it may cause a delay of several hours. Christy leaned back, eyes narrowing slightly. Delays were inevitable. What mattered was control. Adjust the route, he typed. Notify the crews quietly. No alerts, no unnecessary movement. Remember, discretion above all. Simultaneously, Sarah Connolly in London flagged a minor discrepancy in documentation. A routine shipment required slight adjustments to paperwork. Christy examined her report, noting the exact timing and potential exposure. Fine, he replied, handle it with minimal communication. Our pattern must remain invisible. Later, Liam and Sean arrived for a brief meeting. Their expressions were calm but attentive. They knew that even small decisions could affect operations across continents. There's been subtle probing from the West Side faction, Liam reported. No direct action yet, but they're testing boundaries. Christie's calm demeanor remained unchanged. Observe, he instructed. Do not intervene unless they make a mistake that endangers our operations. Timing is everything. Patience is a weapon. Sean nodded. We maintain positions, no direct engagement. Understood. This philosophy distinguished Christie's rule from others: control through observation, influence through loyalty, strategy through patience. He did not act rashly. He allowed others to reveal their intentions through mistakes, using subtlety as a shield. By evening, the subtle tension increased. A shadowy figure was spotted near one of Dublin's warehouses, an unfamiliar person who lingered too long near the loading docks. Christy noticed through the eyes of a trusted associate. "Liam," he said quietly, "a new player is observing the docks. Maintain surveillance but do not approach. Let us learn who they are before acting." Minutes later, confirmation arrived. The stranger had been seen talking briefly to a rival faction member. Christy considered the possibilities: testing boundaries, seeking intelligence, or perhaps mischief. Regardless, he remained unshaken. Every movement in his world could be analyzed and used strategically. Across Europe, Miguel and Sarah coordinated quietly. Every adjustment in timing, every subtle change in shipping routes, was executed flawlessly. Christy reviewed the notes, connecting the dots across Dublin, London, and Valencia. Minor anomalies, delays, inspections, whispered questions, were incorporated into his mental map. Each represented a small risk, a test, or an opportunity. He allowed himself a brief walk along the Liffey as night approached. The water shimmered in the lamplight, mist curling in delicate patterns. Christy observed the city with the precision of a general surveying a battlefield. Every glance, every gesture, every shadow was information. He interpreted behavior, predicted reactions, and adjusted strategies, all without leaving a trace of his presence. Back at the apartment, another meeting commenced. This one included encrypted video calls with Miguel and Sarah. Valencia's secondary port handled the cargo successfully, Miguel reported. No signs of interference aside from routine checks. London documentation verified, Sarah added. All anomalies corrected without exposure. Christy nodded slowly. Excellent. The web remains intact. Our strength lies in precision, not force. Remember, every associate must understand their role without creating ripples that draw attention. Our network is invisible, but it must remain unbroken. As the night deepened, Christy reviewed the minor threat in Dublin. The shadowy observer had left the vicinity without incident, yet Christy considered it a test of vigilance. No overt violence was needed. Observation, restraint, and timing were sufficient. He finally allowed himself to rest briefly, eyes closing for a short period. Even in sleep, his mind remained alert, threading together events across continents. Every shipment, every document, every associate's movement formed an invisible network of influence, controlled meticulously by the Quiet Mastermind. When he awoke, the first light of dawn brushed against the misty Dublin skyline. Christy prepared for another day, ready to weave the threads of his empire with the same subtlety and precision as always. Rivals would test him, inspectors would probe, and whispers would carry messages. But his control, patience, and strategy ensured the web remained intact. Dublin remained unaware. Across continents, shipments moved, alliances strengthened, and power flowed quietly, invisibly, and perfectly, under the careful eye of Christy Kinahan. Dublin awoke under a pale, gray sky. The streets glistened with lingering raindrops, and the faint hum of morning activity stretched through the alleys and bridges. To the casual observer, the city appeared ordinary, calm, and predictable. But Christy Kinahan moved among it with a sense of awareness few could match. Every delivery van, every shadowed figure, every whispered conversation could carry meaning. Christy reviewed the overnight reports. Miguel in Valencia had confirmed the rerouted shipments had cleared the secondary port, but subtle anomalies suggested a rival syndicate was testing the flow. Across London, Sarah had verified the paperwork, but noted a small variance in one of the shipping manifests. Neither issue was critical, but both represented threads that could unravel if ignored. Christy considered these threads carefully. He understood that power was rarely about confrontation. It was about observation, anticipation, and subtle influence. A small misstep in Dublin or a miscommunication across Europe could trigger a cascade of complications. Every thread in his web was connected. Every ripple, however slight, mattered. By mid-morning, Christy convened a meeting with Liam and Sean. The apartment, modest yet methodically arranged, served as a quiet command center. Papers were laid out, encrypted devices active, and maps marked with precise movements of shipments and associates. "There's been a new development," Liam said, voice calm but attentive. "A small faction in the west is moving closer to one of our warehouses. No direct engagement yet, but they're testing boundaries. Christy's eyes narrowed slightly, but his voice remained steady. Observe. Do not intervene unless they make a move that jeopardizes operations. Let them expose themselves. Timing is everything. Sean added, we maintain positions. No contact unless necessary. Christy nodded. Good. Remember, subtlety is our shield. Patience is our weapon. Across the continent, Miguel Alvarez was navigating complications at the Valencia port. A rival syndicate attempted to delay shipments subtly, questioning documentation and introducing minor distractions for the crew. Christie's response was deliberate. Use the southern channel, he instructed. Notify crews quietly. No alerts, no alarms. This is not a test of speed, it's a test of patience, coordination, and discipline. Sarah in London continued to monitor financial and logistical operations, ensuring every transaction aligned with Christie's plans. Even a slight deviation could draw unwanted attention. Christy studied her reports with the precision of a strategist, noting the patterns, redundancies, and points of potential exposure. By late afternoon, Christy walked along the Liffey, observing the reflections of light on the wet cobblestones. The city seemed calm, serene even, but he noticed subtle movements that others would miss. A delivery van that lingered slightly too long, a pedestrian whose glance lingered, and the quiet nods exchanged between associates. These were all pieces of the larger puzzle. Returning to the apartment, Christy prepared for a video conference with Miguel and Sarah. The discussion was brief but focused. Valencia report? He asked. Secondary port handled the cargo successfully, Miguel confirmed. London documents verified. Minor anomalies corrected without exposure, Sarah added. Christy leaned back, absorbing the information. Excellent. Our web remains intact. Precision, discretion, and timing. Never forget these principles. Our power lies in the invisible, the subtle, and the patient. Evening brought a quiet suspense. A shadowy figure had been observed near the warehouse in Dublin. Christie's associate reported via secure line. Liam, Christy said calmly, monitor. No engagement. Let's learn who they are before making a move. Minutes later, the stranger had left without incident. Christy analyzed the situation, noting behavior patterns, likely intentions, and the minimal threat level. His response was measured, not fear, not aggression, but observation and readiness. Every potential danger was a lesson, every movement an opportunity. As night fell, Christy allowed himself a brief period of reflection. He considered the network he had built, associates loyal not out of fear but respect, operations coordinated across continents, power exercised quietly and efficiently. Dublin slept, unaware that its streets, docks, and warehouses were orchestrated by a single strategic mind. Even in sleep, Christie's influence was active. Minor adjustments, silent decisions, and quiet observations ensured the empire remained stable, disciplined, and invisible. A single whisper from him could redirect operations, a nod could reinforce loyalty, a patient wait could neutralize potential threats before they materialized. The city's soft lights reflected off the wet streets, and Christy Kinahan, the quiet mastermind, held control as he always did, calm, precise, and undisturbed. The night deepened over Dublin, but Christy Kinahan's awareness never wavered. Every corner, every shadow, every subtle sound carried information. From his modest apartment, he could sense the city's rhythm, the soft clatter of footsteps on cobblestones, the distant hum of delivery trucks, the whispered conversations in alleyways. Dublin appeared calm, but beneath its surface, small movements could signal significant events. A report came in from Liam. A rival faction in the west had positioned an unfamiliar operative near one of Christie's warehouses. The stranger lingered, observing. Christie did not rush. He studied the report, analyzing patterns, gestures, and timing. Observe, he instructed. Do not intervene. Let them reveal their intentions. Timing is everything. Minutes later, a new message arrived. A miscommunication from an associate in London threatened to delay a shipment. Christie leaned back, considering the implications. Minor errors were inevitable, but in his system, even errors were opportunities to reinforce discipline. He sent clear, concise instructions. Correct the deviation, maintain discretion, and ensure no one outside the network noticed. Meanwhile, in Valencia, Miguel Alvarez faced a subtle test. A dock inspector pressed questions that did not align with usual procedures. Miguel remained calm, redirecting the queries while keeping the crew composed. Christie reviewed the situation over an encrypted line. Handle it quietly, he said. Do not draw attention. Observe reactions and report any anomalies. Our strength is in calm efficiency, not force. Miguel nodded. Understood. We maintain control without escalation. This approach reflected Christie's philosophy. Power was measured in outcomes, not spectacle. His network functioned like a well-oiled machine. Every minor disruption became a test of loyalty, coordination, and patience. Back in Dublin, Christy allowed himself a brief walk along the Liffey. The water shimmered under lamplight, mist curling gently over the surface. The city seemed tranquil, but Christy's eyes caught subtleties invisible to most. A delivery van parked slightly longer than necessary, a pedestrian whose glance lingered too long, a shadow moving against the natural flow of traffic. Each observation fed into his strategy, providing insight without confrontation. Returning to his apartment, he convened a short, focused meeting with Liam and Sean. The Western operative is still observing, Liam reported. Good, Christy said calmly. Let's learn what we can. Observe without interference. Prepare contingencies, but act only when absolutely necessary. Sean added, we maintain positions. No unnecessary exposure. Christy nodded. Perfect. Remember, subtlety is our shield. Patience is our weapon. Even the smallest ripple can be turned to our advantage if handled wisely. Later that evening, Christy took time to review his personal routines. A rare moment of reflection. He poured himself a cup of tea, the warmth a small comfort against the cool Dublin night. Discipline guided even these moments. Every habit, every ritual reinforced clarity of mind. He wrote brief notes on potential improvements for operations, not for immediate action, but as reference for tomorrow. He reflected on the web he had built. Associates loyal out of respect, operations synchronized across continents, power exercised invisibly. Dublin slept unaware of the delicate balance maintained across its streets, docks, and warehouses. Even small mistakes, an incorrect document, a delayed shipment, a shadow in an alley, were anticipated and absorbed by his system. Christy allowed himself a quiet smile. The city appeared ordinary, but every subtle thread moved under his guidance. Every whisper, every glance, every minor gesture contributed to a pattern of control that few could recognize but all depended upon. As midnight approached, Liam reported a new observation. The rival operative had disappeared, likely retreating after failing to discern Christie's network. Christie's response was calm. No confrontation, no spectacle, just quiet strategy, observation, and readiness for the next movement. Finally, Christy allowed himself rest. Even in sleep, his influence remained active, operating through the unseen network of associates, shipments, and loyal operatives. Dublin streets glistened in the moonlight, a city unaware of the masterful orchestration occurring in silence. In the quiet, Christy Kinahan, the quiet mastermind, remained invisible, untouchable, and perfectly in control. A presence felt but never seen, shaping events across continents with patience, precision, and unwavering calm. The morning mist hung thick over Dublin, wrapping the city in a soft, gray veil. Christy Kinahan moved deliberately through the streets, observing the subtle shifts in rhythm and movement. Even in what appeared to be an ordinary morning, he noted details invisible to most. A delivery van parked slightly longer than usual, the exchanged nods of familiar figures, the subtle rearrangement of crates near the docks. From his apartment, encrypted messages began arriving from across Europe. Miguel Alvarez reported an unexpected complication in Valencia. A shipment had been delayed due to stricter inspections at the secondary port, a potential ripple that could impact the synchronized operations across the continent. Noted, Christy murmured. His mind raced calmly, mapping contingencies, adjusting routes, calculating potential exposure. Notify the crew but maintain discretion. Use the northern channel as a secondary contingency. Time the adjustments so that no one notices anything unusual. Across London, Sarah Connolly had identified a discrepancy in financial documentation that could draw scrutiny if left unresolved. Christy reviewed her report, weighing options. Even minor errors could cascade, creating problems far beyond their origin. Correct it quietly, he instructed. Confirm receipt only with necessary parties. Our network thrives in silence, not announcement. By mid-afternoon, Christy convened a conference call with Liam, Sean, Miguel, and Sarah. On screen, the faces of his trusted associates appeared, each reflecting calm focus. Valencia's delay has potential repercussions, Christy said evenly. We must adjust operations without drawing attention. Timing is critical. Liam, coordinate Dublin warehouses to accommodate any shifting schedules. Sean, ensure communications remain encrypted and minimal. Miguel, confirm alternative routes in Spain. Sarah, verify London documents and fund flows. Precision and discretion are paramount. The team nodded, understanding the weight of the instructions. Every minor adjustment mattered. Every decision could influence outcomes across 3 countries. Christy's approach was methodical, patient, and invisible. Power flowed quietly, like a current beneath calm waters. Later, a more immediate concern arrived. A rival faction had intercepted intelligence suggesting that one of Christie's European shipments would arrive earlier than expected. Although the threat was minor, it demanded careful handling. Christy analyzed the data. Rather than confrontation, he opted for misdirection. Allow them to believe the shipment schedule is unchanged, he instructed Liam. Our real movement is shifted by 2 hours. They'll act on incorrect assumptions, exposing themselves without direct engagement. Sean added, understood. Surveillance remains active, but no interference unless necessary. Christy smiled faintly. Subtlety and strategy outweighed aggression. His rivals often revealed their intentions simply by attempting to challenge him, unaware that he anticipated their every move. As evening approached, Christy took a solitary walk along the Liffey. The water shimmered in the dim light, and mist curled over the surface, softening the outlines of the city. Dublin appeared tranquil, but Christy perceived the intricate currents beneath, the flow of loyalty, influence, and subtle power. Returning to his apartment, he reviewed the day's operations. All adjustments had been implemented smoothly. Valencia's shipment rerouted, London documentation corrected, Dublin warehouses synchronized. Minor threats were neutralized and the web remained intact. Every associate had executed their role flawlessly, reinforcing the discipline and trust that held the network together. In quiet reflection, Christy considered the nature of his empire. Power, he knew, was measured not in spectacle or aggression but in outcomes. Every movement, every whisper, every subtle action contributed to the stability of the network. And as night fell over Dublin, he remained at the center, orchestrating events across continents with calm precision. Tonight, as the city slept under a blanket of mist, Christy Kinahan, the quiet mastermind, ensured the empire's continued harmony. Challenges had emerged, but each had been met with strategy rather than force, patience rather than reaction, and precision rather than chaos. In a world that celebrated noise and spectacle, he held power in silence, a control that stretched from Dublin to London, from Valencia to distant ports across Europe. Later that evening, a subtle alert arrived on Christie's encrypted device. An unknown source had fed misleading intelligence into Valencia's port operations. The false information suggested that Christie's shipment would take a different route than intended, potentially attracting attention from rival factions and local authorities. Christy studied the data carefully. Rather than panic, he treated the misinformation as an opportunity. A rival's misstep could expose their intent without any direct confrontation. He drafted precise instructions. Do not alter the actual route. Allow them to act on false assumptions. Maintain standard protocol for crew and documentation. Any exposure should reveal intentions without risk to our operations. Liam in Dublin received similar instructions. Observe the rival's reaction, Christy said. No engagement unless absolutely necessary. Timing and patience are key. Sean monitored communications to ensure nothing in the network indicated that Christy had adjusted plans. Even a hint of awareness could alert rivals, negating the advantage. Christie's strategy relied on invisibility, foresight, and control, not overt action. Across London, Sarah Connolly managed financial flows. Minor discrepancies were corrected quietly. Each adjustment required precision, moving funds, confirming transactions, and verifying documentation, all without attracting unnecessary scrutiny. Christy observed her work with the calm satisfaction of a general overseeing a battlefield, where every movement, no matter how small, contributed to overall control. Meanwhile, Miguel in Valencia executed the adjustments on the ground. Crews followed the standard procedure, unaware that rival observers were acting on false intelligence. The operation was silent, coordinated, and entirely invisible to outsiders. Christy monitored updates in real time, mapping potential ripple effects and ensuring contingencies were in place. As night fell over Dublin, Christy took a solitary walk along the Liffey. The mist curled over the water, softening the edges of the city. Streetlights reflected in puddles, casting long, delicate shadows. Christy observed subtle details. A delivery van paused briefly, a pedestrian glanced toward an alley, and 2 figures nodded discreetly at each other. Every movement could carry meaning, Every gesture was a thread in the web of influence he maintained. Returning to the apartment, Christy reviewed the day's developments. Minor threats had been neutralized, misinformation had been turned to his advantage, shipments and documentation were synchronized across 3 countries, and the web remained intact. He allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. Power, he knew, was measured not in noise or spectacle but in control and outcome. Every whisper, every glance, every subtle decision reinforced the stability of his empire. Dublin, London, and Valencia operated like cogs in a single machine, all moving in harmony under his guidance. In the quiet of his apartment, Christy considered his personal routines. He poured a cup of tea, noting the warmth and subtle aroma. Simple rituals grounded him, providing clarity and focus. Even mundane actions, reviewing notes, checking encrypted messages, or preparing tea, were executed with precision, reflecting the same discipline he applied to his empire. He reflected on the web of loyalty, discipline, and trust he had built. Associates followed him not out of fear, but out of respect and understanding of his methods. Even minor errors became opportunities to reinforce cohesion, training, and vigilance. Christy's power was not visible, it was quiet, subtle, and absolute. Before retiring for the night, he convened a final review with his inner circle: Liam, Sean, Miguel, and Sarah. Each reported that operations remained secure, rival factions had been misdirected, and all shipments and documentation were on track. Christy acknowledged their updates with measured nods, reinforcing trust and discipline through calm authority rather than command. As midnight deepened, Dublin slept unaware of the intricate orchestration of events taking place across streets, docks, and warehouses. Every minor action, every subtle observation, and every strategic adjustment contributed to the continued stability of Christy Kinahan's empire. And in that quiet mastery, Christy remained the unseen hand guiding every move, every whisper, and every ripple across continents. The quiet mastermind had once again ensured that his influence remained invisible, uninterrupted, and perfectly controlled. Dublin streets were cloaked in a thin morning fog, the kind that softened edges and muffled sound. Christy Kinahan moved through the familiar cobblestones with a measured calm. Nothing in the city stirred suspicion. Yet in his mind, the quiet rhythms of Dublin were the surface of a much larger, more complex network stretching across Europe. The alert came through an encrypted line. A rival syndicate based in Spain had started probing the network more aggressively. Subtle, almost invisible actions. Unexpected shipments, covert inquiries, whispered questions at Valencia docks. Christy read the intelligence with calm precision. This was the first real test of his global control. He called a meeting with his inner circle: Liam and Sean in Dublin, Sarah in London, and Miguel in Valencia. "Our network is being tested," Christy began evenly. "The syndicate in Spain is probing. Their moves are subtle but calculated. We will respond without alerting them. Every action must be invisible." Miguel nodded. "We've noticed unusual inspections and questioning at Valencia. Nothing overt, but enough to suggest they're trying to map our operations." Sarah added, "London documentation remains secure, but they've been sending inquiries indirectly, requests for confirmation, questions about shipment timing. They're testing for weaknesses." Christy absorbed the reports. Patience was his weapon. Let them act. Observe and collect. Every misstep will reveal intentions. Liam and Sean maintain Dublin surveillance. Ensure no disruption. We act only when absolutely necessary. As the day progressed, Christy reviewed the network's vulnerabilities. Minor errors were inevitable, but each could be turned to advantage. A rival's misstep, a poorly timed shipment, or a hint of panic among their associates would provide intelligence without confrontation. He devised a subtle countermeasure. Slight adjustments in shipment timing rerouted documents, and minor diversions to mislead the Spanish faction. Each move was carefully calculated, precise, and invisible to outsiders. Liam reported a minor anomaly in Dublin. One of the Western faction's operatives lingered near a warehouse longer than expected. Nothing suspicious yet, but they're clearly observing. Christy nodded. Maintain distance. Do not engage. Every move is an opportunity to study their behavior. Timing and patience will expose their strategy. Meanwhile, Miguel coordinated alternative routes in Valencia. Crews followed standard procedures, unaware that they were part of a strategic misdirection. Even routine checks were leveraged to reinforce the illusion. Christy monitored updates closely, noting each subtle reaction from the rival syndicate. Sarah ensured London's documentation aligned seamlessly with the adjusted schedules. Every transaction, every record, was synchronized to maintain invisibility. The web of influence operated like a living organism, coordinated, disciplined, and quiet. By evening, the rival syndicate had revealed a minor miscalculation. They acted prematurely on false assumptions created by Christy's subtle rerouting. This provided insight into their methods, revealing key players, motivations, and weaknesses. Christy summarized to his inner circle, "We now understand their structure, their priorities, and their tendencies. No force was used, yet we've gained critical intelligence. This is how influence is exercised, through observation, subtle control, and patience." The team acknowledged silently, recognizing the power of operating invisibly, yet decisively. Even small, disciplined actions could yield outcomes far beyond the immediate. As night fell, Christy allowed himself a brief walk along the Liffey. The water shimmered under the streetlights, mist curling softly over the surface. The city appeared calm, ordinary, even peaceful. Yet Christy's mind raced with possibilities, planning for the next steps in the network's defense. Each ripple in the system, from Dublin to London to Valencia, was mapped and accounted for, each potential threat anticipated. Returning to his apartment, he reflected on the day. His empire had faced its first global test, and every component had held. Rivals had probed, information had been manipulated, and loyalty had been reinforced, all without visible conflict. Even in the quiet of his apartment, Christy Kinahan remained the master of the unseen, orchestrating operations across continents with patience, precision, and calm. Dublin slept under the subtle guidance of the Quiet Mastermind, unaware of the invisible threads that bound a global network together. The fog lingered over Dublin as dawn broke, softening the edges of the familiar streets. Christy Kinahan moved through the city with calm precision, his eyes noting subtleties that would go unnoticed by most. Every van, every pedestrian, every fleeting shadow was a data point, feeding into a complex map of influence that spanned continents. Encrypted updates arrived from Valencia. The rival syndicate had escalated their efforts. Additional inspections, covert questioning, and attempts to intercept communications. Though these actions were subtle, they indicated a higher level of coordination and audacity. Christie's first global test had passed, but now the pressure was rising. He convened his inner circle immediately. Liam and Sean in Dublin, Sarah in London, and Miguel in Valencia. "They've increased activity," Christy said evenly. "They're probing for weaknesses, testing our response times, and attempting to manipulate information. We respond not with force but with strategy. Observation first, intervention only when necessary." Miguel nodded. "We've implemented minor diversions at the port. Crews are following the adjusted plan. They've taken the bait, but we remain invisible." Sarah added, "London's documentation is synchronized with the new schedules. No inconsistencies are detectable. The misdirection is effective." Liam reported, "Dublin's western faction attempted minor interference. We monitored without engagement as instructed. No exposure." Christy allowed a faint smile. "Excellent. Every move we allow them to make is a lesson. Timing, patience, and subtlety, these are our weapons." By midday, Christy assessed potential vulnerabilities. Every shipment, every document, every movement could be exploited if not perfectly synchronized. He adjusted routing schedules, shifted communication patterns, and confirmed contingencies across all three regions. His mind worked like a chessboard, predicting rival moves several steps in advance. A soft chime alerted him to another update. The Spanish faction had attempted a subtle manipulation of crew behavior at the Valencia port, introducing delays and distractions. Christy analyzed the reports. He chose not to confront them directly. Instead, he created a minor misdirection, a simultaneous reroute of shipments, adjusted timing for dock operations, and a subtle change in document verification protocols. Minutes later, confirmation arrived. The rival syndicate's misstep had been amplified by their own assumptions. Christy had turned pressure into insight, learning more about their network without ever exposing his own. As evening fell, Christy walked along the Liffey. The river shimmered under streetlights, mist curling gently over the water. Dublin appeared calm, serene even, but Christy's awareness extended far beyond the visible streets. Every glance, every gesture, every minor anomaly contributed to his understanding of the network. Returning home, he reviewed the day's operations. Minor threats were neutralized, rival attempts were turned to advantage, and coordination across Dublin, London, and Valencia remained flawless. The web of influence was intact, resilient, and invisible to all but those who operated within it. Christy allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. Power, he knew, was measured in outcomes, not spectacle. Every whisper, every subtle adjustment, every calculated observation reinforced the stability of his empire. His rivals believed they were challenging him, but in reality, they were revealing themselves, feeding information into his network through their own actions. As night deepened, Christy convened one final review with his inner circle. Every report confirmed. Operations secure, rival probing understood, misinformation neutralized, shipments synchronized. Dublin slept, unaware of the precise orchestration occurring across streets, docks, and warehouses. In the quiet of his apartment, Christy Kinahan, the quiet mastermind, remained the unseen hand guiding every decision. Patience, precision, and calm were his constant allies. Challenges could escalate, rivals could probe, but his control was absolute, invisible, and unbroken. Tonight, Dublin rested under the subtle guidance of a man whose influence stretched across continents, quiet, measured, and entirely unnoticeable. And as Christy allowed himself a moment of calm, he knew that even the rising pressure of rivals could not shake the foundation he had meticulously constructed. The first hints of dawn filtered through Dublin's misty streets. Rain had ceased, leaving the cobblestones slick and reflective, softening the city's edges. Christy Kinahan walked quietly, observing subtle signs of movement. A delivery van lingering slightly too long, two figures exchanging a brief nod, a pedestrian glancing toward the warehouses. The alert arrived as he reached his apartment. A shipment in Valencia faced a sudden inspection that was not part of the planned procedure. The rival syndicates' earlier probing had escalated into unpredictable action. Though minor on the surface, the timing threatened to ripple through operations across Dublin and London. Christy remained calm. This was a test, not one of strength but of strategy. He immediately convened his inner circle. Liam and Sean in Dublin, Sarah in London, Miguel in Valencia. The Valencia shipment faces unexpected scrutiny, Christy said evenly. We must adjust without revealing our response. Observation, subtle intervention, and communication through trusted channels only. Miguel nodded. Crews are prepared to follow any revised instructions. We can manage the inspection without alerting the rival faction. Sarah confirmed, London documentation aligns with the revised schedule. No inconsistencies visible. The misdirection remains intact. Liam added, Dublin warehouses are synchronized with the timing adjustments. Surveillance is active. No direct engagement needed. Christy allowed a faint smile. Excellent. Every challenge is an opportunity to learn more about our rivals. Patience, precision, and subtlety will guide us. He immediately implemented a multi-layered response. Minor rerouting of shipments through secondary docks. Encrypted communication adjustments to maintain invisibility. Subtle misdirection, creating the impression that the inspection would delay operations, while the real plan continued unimpeded. Within hours, the rival faction's actions revealed their assumptions and priorities. By acting subtly, Christy had extracted information without direct confrontation or exposure. That evening, Christy took a walk along the Liffey. The river reflected the dim glow of streetlights, mist curling over the surface. The city appeared serene, but Christy's mind calculated every subtle movement in Dublin, London, and Valencia. Each gesture, glance, or minor anomaly fed into a mental map of influence. Returning home, he reviewed every detail of the day. Minor threats neutralized, rival probing recorded, shipments synchronized, documentation verified. The web of influence remained intact, resilient, and invisible. Even in quiet reflection, Christy considered the human elements. Loyalty, discipline, and trust among his associates. Every minor deviation had been managed, reinforcing cohesion without confrontation. This was power executed subtly, silently, but absolutely. By midnight, all operations were stabilized. The rival faction's premature actions had revealed critical intelligence about their methods and priorities. Christy summarized to his inner circle. We faced an unexpected test and our network responded flawlessly. They revealed intentions, made miscalculations, and we gained insight without action or exposure. This is how influence is maintained, through observation, patience, and precise adjustment. The team understood, even subtle challenges could strengthen the network when managed correctly. As Dublin slept, the city remained unaware of the orchestration occurring across streets, docks, and warehouses. Christy Kinahan, the quiet mastermind, had faced an unexpected test and turned it into advantage. Patience, strategy, and calm had guided the outcome, reinforcing control over an empire that spanned continents. And as he finally allowed himself a moment of rest, Christy knew that no challenge, however sudden, could destabilize a network built on loyalty, precision, and silent mastery. The first light of dawn broke over Dublin, casting a soft, muted glow across the rain-kissed streets. Christy Kinahan walked deliberately along the familiar cobblestones, noting subtle movements. A delivery van pausing slightly longer than usual, a figure lingering near a warehouse, the faint hum of a distant tram. To the casual eye, nothing was amiss, but Christy's awareness extended far beyond the surface. Encrypted alerts pinged on his device. The rival syndicate in Spain had escalated their efforts. Multiple shipments were now under subtle surveillance, and indirect attempts were made to disrupt scheduling in London and Valencia. These moves were clever but not yet threatening to the integrity of his network. Christy convened his inner circle immediately. Liam and Sean in Dublin, Sarah in London, and Miguel in Valencia. They've increased activity, Christy began calmly. They're probing for weaknesses across multiple points. Their methods are sophisticated, but their exposure is growing. We respond without alerting them. Every action must remain invisible. Miguel confirmed, Valencia operations are secure. Crews are following standard protocol, unaware of the rival attempts. Minor adjustments have been implemented quietly. Sarah added, London documentation remains consistent. Any discrepancies introduced by the rival probing have been corrected seamlessly. Liam reported from Dublin. Western faction continues observation near warehouses. No overt action, but they're testing boundaries. Christy nodded, his expression unreadable. Good. Every misstep they make gives us insight. Timing, patience, subtlety, these are our weapons. Christy immediately implemented a coordinated countermeasure. Subtle rerouting of shipments to secondary docks in Valencia, time to mislead the rival faction. Encrypted communication adjustments to prevent interception. Controlled exposure of minor details to create misperceptions, allowing the rival to reveal their strategy without realizing it. Minutes later, confirmations arrived from Miguel, Sarah, and Liam. Every element of the network was aligned. The rival faction had reacted prematurely to false signals, exposing assumptions and weaknesses. Christy allowed himself a faint smile. Even under pressure, his system worked. Observation and subtle influence yielded more than confrontation ever could. Every misstep by a rival was intelligence. Every reaction was a thread in his growing map of global control. By evening, Christy reviewed the day's developments. The rival faction had escalated pressure in multiple regions, but none had disrupted operations. Shipments were synchronized, documentation was flawless, and surveillance remained active but discreet. Even the smallest disturbances had been converted into lessons, strengthening loyalty, coordination, and strategic awareness. Christy took a brief walk along the Liffey. The water shimmered under the lamplight, mist curling in delicate patterns. Dublin seemed tranquil, but his mind worked across 3 countries, anticipating the rival's next moves, planning contingencies, and reinforcing the invisible threads of his empire. Returning to his apartment, he reviewed reports from each region. Every adjustment had been executed perfectly. The web remained intact, resilient, and invisible to outsiders. Even in quiet reflection, Christy understood that real power lay not in spectacle or violence, but in precision, patience, and the careful orchestration of events. Dublin awoke under a pale, gray dawn, the streets slick with overnight rain. Christy Kinahan walked quietly through the familiar cobblestones, noting subtle movements. A delivery van paused slightly too long, a figure glanced toward a warehouse, and the faint hum of distant activity suggested unseen coordination. Encrypted alerts pinged on his device. The rival syndicate had made a bold move, an unexpected attempt to intercept a shipment in Valencia. The operation was subtle but audacious, aiming to exploit any weakness in timing or communication. Christy remained calm. This was not the first test, but it was the first that required precise global coordination. He convened his inner circle. Liam and Sean in Dublin, Sarah in London, Miguel in Valencia. They've acted, Christy said evenly. They're attempting to intercept a shipment. Do not panic. Observe and respond with precision. Timing, patience, and subtlety remain paramount. Miguel confirmed, crews are following rerouted instructions. Rival operatives are in position, but unaware of the secondary route we've implemented. Sarah added, London documentation is aligned. Any inquiries from third parties are deflected without exposure. Liam reported from Dublin, observation of the rivals' operatives continues. They've committed to action, but their position reveals weaknesses. Christy allowed a faint smile. Good. Every bold move they make exposes their assumptions. We convert their audacity into intelligence without direct engagement. Christy implemented a global countermeasure. Reinforced misdirection, slight variations in shipment timing and port routes to maintain invisibility. Encrypted communication updates, confirm only with trusted operatives, preventing rival knowledge. Controlled exposure, deliberate small clues to guide the rival into revealing priorities and weaknesses. Within hours, confirmations arrived from each region. Every element of the network remained synchronized. The rivals' miscalculation had been magnified by their own assumptions. Christy had turned a bold action into an intelligence-gathering success. As evening approached, Christy walked along the Liffey, mist curling over the water, reflecting the soft glow of streetlights. The city appeared tranquil, but he remained alert, mentally mapping movements across Dublin, London, and Valencia. Every glance, every gesture, every minor anomaly added to his understanding of the rival network. Returning home, Christy reflected on the day. The rival had acted boldly, but Christy's patience, foresight, and global coordination had neutralized the threat without confrontation. Every misstep by the adversary had been anticipated, observed, and exploited. He prepared for a final review with his inner circle. Reports confirmed stability, shipments secure, documentation aligned, rival exposure documented, surveillance intact. Every minor deviation had been managed, reinforcing loyalty and coordination. Christy concluded, the bold move has revealed priorities, weaknesses, and tendencies. No force was used, yet we have gained everything we need. Influence is exercised quietly, decisively, and invisibly. As night fell over Dublin, the city remained unaware of the orchestration spanning continents. Christy Kinahan, the quiet mastermind, had managed a bold challenge with calm precision. Patience, strategy, and subtle control ensured the continued stability of his empire. Even in quiet reflection, he knew that every rival move, every misstep, and every audacious attempt only reinforced the strength, coordination, and discipline of the network he commanded. The morning fog clung to Dublin as the city slowly stirred awake. Christy Kinahan walked deliberately along the familiar streets, his eyes noting the subtle signs of movement. A van pausing slightly longer than usual, two figures exchanging glances, and the faint rhythm of distant activity. Encrypted alerts pinged on his device. The rival syndicate had escalated their actions, an unusually coordinated attempt to intercept a shipment in Valencia coinciding with probing operations in London and surveillance in Dublin. This was the first challenge that required simultaneous action across all three regions. Christy remained calm. This was a test of global coordination and strategic patience, not brute force. He convened his inner circle immediately. Liam and Sean in Dublin, Sarah in London, Miguel in Valencia. They've made a decisive move, Christy said evenly. Their actions are bold, coordinated, but predictable if observed carefully. We respond without revealing our hand. Observation first, intervention only when necessary. Miguel reported, crews are aware of the alternative routes. We can maintain schedules without detection. Rival operatives are in position but unaware of our adjustments. Sarah added, London documentation is synchronized with new instructions. Financial flows remain seamless. Any inquiries are deflected without exposure. Liam confirmed, Dublin surveillance has identified minor movements from the Western faction. They're probing for timing errors but no breach has occurred. Christy allowed a faint smile. Good. Every move they make reveals their methods. Patience, precision, subtlety, our weapons remain effective. Christy implemented a coordinated defensive strategy. Simultaneous misdirection. Slight schedule shifts in Dublin, London, and Valencia to create the illusion of vulnerability. Encrypted coordination. Precise communication among trusted operatives to maintain invisibility. Controlled exposure. Deliberate, minor clues to guide the rival faction into overcommitting. Observation and logging. Every reaction, hesitation, and assumption documented for strategic analysis. Within hours, the rival faction's misstep became evident. By overestimating their influence, they had revealed priorities, weaknesses, and behavioral patterns. Christy had turned the decisive move into intelligence without confrontation. That evening, Christy took a solitary walk along the Liffey. The river shimmered under streetlights, mist curling gently. Dublin seemed peaceful, but Christy's awareness spanned continents. Every minor gesture, every glance, every subtle movement contributed to a mental map of the rival's network. Returning to his apartment, he reviewed the day's outcomes. Operations remained secure, Shipments arrived on time, documentation aligned, rival missteps recorded, and surveillance maintained. Even under pressure, the network remained resilient. Christy allowed himself a brief moment of reflection. Power, he understood, was measured in outcomes, not visibility. Every misstep, every audacious action by the rival, reinforced the stability and cohesion of the network. Patience and strategy had transformed risk into advantage. As midnight fell, his inner circle reported. Valencia, alternative routes executed flawlessly, rival misled. London, documentation verified, inquiries deflected. Dublin, surveillance intact, rival movements observed, no engagement required. Christy concluded, their decisive move has revealed critical insights. We have gained knowledge without action, influence without exposure. This is control in its purest form. Dublin slept, unaware of the global orchestration occurring across streets, docks, and warehouses. Christy Kinahan, the quiet mastermind, had neutralized the threat, reinforcing his authority and ensuring that his empire remained invisible, disciplined, and absolutely secure. The evening air in Dublin was cool and damp, the mist curling over the Liffey like smoke over a calm battlefield. Christy Kinahan moved with deliberate calm, his presence unnoticed amid the soft patter of distant footsteps and the occasional tram. Across continents, subtle shifts in timing and movement were unfolding, orchestrated by him. Encrypted alerts began to arrive. Rival operatives were reacting to the misdirection Christy had carefully laid out. Crews in Valencia had followed rerouted instructions flawlessly, London documentation had been adjusted subtly, and Dublin surveillance had captured every minor movement of the Western faction. Each step by the rival revealed assumptions, tendencies, and weaknesses, exactly as Christy had predicted. Christy convened his inner circle for a final coordination of the day. Liam and Sean in Dublin, Sarah in London, Miguel in Valencia. They've reacted to our previous adjustments, Christy said, voice calm and even. Their bold moves have revealed priorities, gaps in coordination, and impatience. Now we respond, not with confrontation but with calculated countermeasures. Miguel nodded. Crews are positioned and ready to execute revised routes. Rival operatives remain unaware of the adjustments. Sarah added, London transactions and documentation are synchronized with new schedules. Any inquiries from third parties are deflected seamlessly. Liam reported, Dublin surveillance remains active. Observed movements align with expected miscalculations from the rival. Christy allowed himself a faint, controlled smile. Good. Every overreach, every misstep, and every assumption is part of the intelligence we collect. Timing and subtlety are our allies. The countermeasure strategy was multi-layered. Secondary misdirection, subtle rerouting of key shipments, with timing shifts designed to amplify the rival's own miscalculations. Information feedback loops, controlled leaks to rival operatives that reinforced false assumptions about Christie's operations. Synchronization of operations. Dublin warehouses, London financial flows, and Valencia ports coordinated with precise timing to maintain invisibility. Observation and analysis. Every rival reaction logged, cross-referenced, and incorporated into Christie's strategic map for future actions. Within hours, the rivals' moves had created more opportunities than threats. Every premature action exposed a flaw in their coordination, a tendency to overestimate influence or impatience that Christie could exploit. By nightfall, Christie walked along the river, the Liffey shimmering under lamplight, mist curling across the surface. Dublin appeared serene, ordinary, and unaware of the orchestration spanning continents. Yet, through careful observation and subtle manipulation, Christie had turned the rival's bold actions into a wealth of intelligence. Returning to the apartment, he reviewed each region. Valencia, rerouted shipments executed flawlessly, rival misled. London, documentation synchronized, inquiries deflected. Dublin, surveillance intact, rival exposure documented. Christie reflected on the effectiveness of patience and precision. Every action by the rival was now a lesson, every misstep a map for the next phase of strategy. Power, he knew, was measured in outcomes, not spectacle. As midnight approached, the inner circle confirmed the network's continued stability. Christie spoke softly, almost to himself. The decisive counter has reinforced our position. They have revealed priorities, exposed weaknesses, and committed to missteps, all without direct confrontation. Influence has been exercised quietly, absolutely, and invisibly. Dublin slept, unaware of the intricate orchestration flowing through warehouses, offices, and ports. Christy Kinahan, the Quiet Mastermind, had executed a global counterattack with calm precision, ensuring loyalty, coordination, and control remained intact. Even in quiet reflection, he understood that this was only one stage in an ongoing contest of strategy. The rivals' audacity had been neutralized, their assumptions exposed, and the network's strength solidified, all through patience, observation, and the meticulous orchestration of invisible threads. The first light of dawn filtered through Dublin's misty streets, painting the cobblestones with soft reflections. The city appeared calm, ordinary, unaware that over the past days, a series of subtle global maneuvers had been executed with precision, discipline, and absolute control. Christy Kinahan walked slowly along the River Liffey, observing the soft patterns of life. A delivery van pausing briefly, a pedestrian's glance, the faint hum of distant activity. To most, it was a quiet morning. To Christy, it was the culmination of days of strategy, patience, and orchestration. Encrypted updates confirmed what he had long anticipated. The rival syndicates' attempts at interference had failed. Every bold move, every probing action, every misstep had been anticipated, observed, and leveraged. Across Dublin, London, and Valencia, shipments had arrived on schedule, documentation remained flawless, and rival operatives had revealed weaknesses without ever realizing it. Christy convened his inner circle one final time for review. Liam and Sean in Dublin, Sarah in London, Miguel in Valencia. "You have executed flawlessly," Christy said evenly. "Every adjustment, every observation, every subtle redirection has reinforced our network. The rival has exposed their methods and assumptions, while we remain unseen, untouchable, and fully in control." Miguel nodded. The crews followed instructions perfectly. No deviation, no exposure. Sarah added, "London documentation remained synchronized. All inquiries were deflected without incident." Liam reported, "Dublin surveillance captured every minor move of the Western faction. We remain invisible but aware." Christy allowed a faint smile. "Excellent. Patience, subtlety, and precision have preserved the integrity of our empire. This is the quiet victory of discipline and foresight." As the morning mist began to lift, Christy reflected on the past days. Power, he understood, was measured in outcomes, not spectacle. Every challenge faced, every bold attempt, every rival probe, had reinforced the strength, cohesion, and discipline of his network. Influence had been exercised quietly, invisibly, and decisively. He prepared a brief report for his international contacts, maintaining operational continuity while subtly reinforcing loyalty and coordination. Every message, every instruction was precise, deliberate, and discreet. Returning home, Christy allowed himself a rare moment of quiet. He poured a cup of tea, the warmth a small comfort against the crisp morning air. He reviewed mental notes on potential future threats, adjustments, and strategic opportunities. Even in stillness, his mind remained active, weaving the threads of influence that spanned continents. By evening, Dublin rested under a blanket of calm. Streetlights reflected in wet cobblestones, and the river shimmered softly. No one walking the streets suspected the orchestration occurring across warehouses, offices, and ports. Yet Christie's empire had withstood the first global test, navigated bold moves by rivals, and emerged stronger, more disciplined, and more cohesive than ever. Christy Kinahan, the quiet mastermind, had turned observation into advantage, misdirection into insight, and patience into power. The rival faction had been neutralized without confrontation, their assumptions exploited, their audacity revealed. As night fell and the city slept, Christy reflected on the principle that had guided him through every challenge. Power resides in subtlety, patience, and precision. Control is strongest when invisible, influence most absolute when unrecognized. Dublin slumbered quietly. Across continents, shipments moved, documents aligned, and loyalty remained steadfast. Christy Kinahan, calm, measured, and precise, held the empire in balance. In silence, in observation, in subtlety, he had achieved victory. And with that quiet mastery, the quiet mastermind prepared for the days ahead, knowing that while challenges would always arise, his patience, intelligence, and network ensured that he remained unseen, untouchable, and entirely in control.